Now, the Bram Weinstein Show on Washington's new home for sports, ESPN 630.
And away we go. Mike Callow filling in for Bram Weinstein here on ESPN 630, the sports capital. Bram out today, hopefully back tomorrow. I got you covered, though, until 5 o'clock. Really, I got you covered until 6 o'clock for Bram's show. And then, of course, my show, The Line Change, at 5 o'clock here on ESPN 630 and on the ESPN 630 app. I'll plug my own show here, too, for The Line Change. I finally have a podcast feed in the podcast world. It took a little bit to get it from the old corporate side to officially be up. So make sure you check that out on Apple, Spotify, everywhere else you get podcasts. Or just search The Line Change and my name, Mike Callow, MikeCallow. And we'll get you covered, and you can listen to The Line Change starting every day as well. I'm also going to need some feedback on my show, too, The Line Change. You know, I give out 5 gambling picks to finish out the show every day. But I will say, you know, do I need to podcast that separately for you guys? Do I need to make that format a little bit different? You tweet at me at Mike_Callow, or you can hit me on Instagram as well. Those 2 platforms. I'll try to get you in during the show. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything else, just hit me up there. With Bram out today, though, a lot to get to for today's rundown. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the sports calendar as far as yesterday is concerned. Memorial Day, I totally understand. It is a day of remembrance for our troops and all those who served and, home of the free because of the brave. I totally get it. I will say this, though. I think there does need to be something on the sports calendar, whether that means at night or midday. I have a theory with the NHL. We'll get into it in just a little bit. Plus, NBA Finals, one half of it is set. The Celtics end up sweeping the Pacers. And Greeny, on his show said, the Pacers should be up 3-1. I mean, come on, Greeny. Killer instinct by the Celtics ends up putting them in the Eastern Conference Finals. Of course, tonight, though, we do have Mavericks Timberwolves. If that ends up being a sweep, we will not have basketball until next Thursday. I wonder if the NBA would try to move things up. I don't think they would, because all of that travel, all of the media plans, everything is kind of locked in. I would think, though, they'd want to move it up to the weekend, but we'll see if a sweep happens tonight. Plus, Udonis Haslem joined the morning show. You'll hear from him coming up next hour as well on all things finals. If you missed John Keim with Bram on Friday, you'll hear that in about 20 minutes here on his show, as well as John and Bram broke down everything having to do with the Commanders. There was no podcast this weekend, so if you missed it live, you'll get to hear it in about 20 minutes here on the Bram Weinstein Show. Plus, some sound from Louis Riddick. Old friend Victor Robles was DFA'd. And I have a little bit of a Caps subject for you coming up later in just a little bit. So we'll get to all of that coming up here during the Bram Weinstein Show. But let's start things off with the NBA Finals. Celtics end up getting a sweep against the Pacers. The Mavericks, of course, sitting basically in the same boat. A lot of discussion on both sides for both of these teams here when it comes down to it. Tatum doesn't have a ring yet for Boston. Luka doesn't have a ring in Dallas. Of course, Kyrie won one with Cleveland years and years ago when LeBron came back. But the narrative on this finals is going to be fascinating, mainly because the Celtics from wall to wall the entire season have been the perennial favorites in that they were coming in as the number 1 team because of the number 1 team in the East. They were going to walk in. They actually walked in even easier than I thought they would. When it comes down to it, that their road to the playoffs was, it was ridiculous when you look at how easy it was. They take care of the Pacers. They were going to take care of the Knicks, too, if that ended up happening. They beat the Cavaliers 4-1, and then in that one, of course, Donovan Mitchell didn't even play towards the end. And before that, of course, they took care of the Heat. And the Heat didn't even have Jimmy Butler, who is honestly, as we talk about tons of times here on Bram's show, he's a stone cold killer when it comes to the playoffs. And, it's one of the easiest walk-ins I think I've seen in a long time when it comes to the Eastern Conference. And we've had teams get banged up. We've had easier teams, right? But even all of the teams the Celtics played, they were better than them even at full strength. But they haven't even had their top stars in all of them, except for the Pacers. But even then, the Pacers, the Celtics took that killer instinct and won every game down the stretch. It's unfortunate because I really do think had the Pacers won that first game and not blown the lead and then gone into overtime, I think we are talking about a completely different series. The way the Pacers dispatched the Knicks, I really thought, okay, they can actually score. But, this is actually the two series have been flipped on one another in terms of how they've been won, in my opinion, with the Celtics actually winning down the stretch as opposed to on the other side of things, the Timberwolves not being able to produce down the stretch and the Mavericks taking advantage there. So it's going to be fascinating, too, how both teams are going to seemingly win in different ways to take each other on during the finals. The logic or the narrative around Kyrie Irving is really interesting. I saw former Wizard Atan Thomas fire off a tweet over the weekend, maybe it was yesterday, where he said, the narrative has completely changed with how Kyrie has played and how the media does not, talk about whatever he was talking about before. And, I like Atan. Atan always has very intelligent things to say about all things NBA on and off the court. He's one of the better minds when it comes to hoops. But what I would say is, Kyrie's, all he's doing, though, is not making that the focal point. He probably still believes a lot of whatever he was, spouting off about. But, when it came to Kyrie, too, there was a little bit of kind of stick to hoops when it came down to it. And so, that was brought on by himself to Kyrie. And look, if Kyrie was going crazy and hooping like he was now while he was saying those things, I think people would, kind of try to look the other way, bare minimum. But the fact of the matter was he wasn't. And granted, we now can kind of confirm Brooklyn wasn't in the best place with Kyrie, Harden, and Durant. It was never the best fit for either one of them or all three of them once Harden was really added to the equation. So what I would say is, yeah, Kyrie couldn't do both. He couldn't actually kind of speak his mind on whatever he believed in, whether it was stuff on vaccines, whether it was certain reading materials that he was tweeting out, whether it was, at-home remedies about certain things, whether it was being a flat earther, right? There was a ton of things that he was saying, and he just never was helping himself down the stretch, But I really don't think at any point in time people were saying, oh, Kyrie Irving is washed. I think people were kind of saying he has to get back to the way he was for all of this to become worth it. And look, I even look at Dallas in the second half last year with Kyrie and with Luka and even, trading Porzingis. They were trying to fit the pieces in around Luka. I guess Porzingis trade was 2 years ago, really? Or no, it was 2 years ago. Yeah. They were trying to kind of fix everything and get these other pieces in to try to get the best fit that matters, right? And I kind of give the Mavs credit. David Aldridge tweeted it out how, they did tank those last few games of last season knowing that they weren't a good enough team and getting better defensively with who they drafted and some free agent signings. And look, I've long said this. It takes guts and you have to kind of swallow your pride to do something like that. And I think they should be commended for it. Ted Leonsis for years, did talk about how he loved the Wizards getting into that 8th seed because it would mean generating playoff money and it would be generating buzz around the team. And look, the last time the Wizards snuck in, it was against the 76ers when it was Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook. And, if that's the organizational goal, fine, but, the goals need to be loftier than that. And so I commend the Mavs for actually taking literally a half a step back to try to take 2 steps forward. And they have quite literally done that when it comes to this playoff run. Will they sweep the Timberwolves? I'm not sure. But this has been a hell of a run. And by the way, good on Kyrie. He has reminded everyone why he's basically been touted as one of the best ball handlers in NBA history. You love to see, I always say this about any star, right? Really anybody in any sport and any story, but in sports specifically, everyone loves a comeback story. And is Kyrie's a comeback story that everyone's kind of rooting for? I doubt it, but you know what? I think it was a shame to see how what Kyrie was saying off the court affect him on the court and then also affect everyone kind of criticizing him on the court. And look, if this is his comeback story, good on him. If he ends up winning a ring in Dallas and that puts him, in light of winning in Cleveland with LeBron and then winning in Dallas with Luka, that's a nice little legacy that he has built there, right? And, you can't deny what he's done. And he was always, I think, going to be a Hall of Famer. But I would say this would really cement his legacy in making it into the Hall of Fame. So, look, I know the series isn't over with tonight for Dallas, but it's incoming. There's no way that the Timberwolves are going to win 4 in a row. They're too young of a team. They haven't had a killer instinct down the stretch. Karl Anthony Towns has made just some dumb decisions down the stretch. Anthony Edwards can't pick up all of the slack. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve any blame, but Cat is the one that's really hurting him. He's been in the league, 7, 8, 9 years at this point, and he's making some just really rash decisions with the ball, defensively and offensively, honestly. So it hasn't been fun to watch with the Mavericks just taking care of business against the Timberwolves. On the Celtics side of things, with them taking care of the Pacers. The funny part with them, too, is, if they're of course rooting for the Timberwolves to win one of these games because they're going to be sitting at home on over a week's worth of rest. That being said, if I'm the Mavericks, I'm really trying to end things tonight because I'm not trying to elongate this series. I'm not trying to go back on the road. With this game being in Dallas tonight, I would have to think they're going to do the best they can to not try to hit the road one more time and then play in Minnesota on Thursday. I have to think that their legitimate goal is to end things tonight. If you're curious, Game 4 tonight, of course, then Thursday, Game 5 if possible. Game 6 would be on Saturday, and then Game 7 would be on Monday. So they would get a couple of days off until they'd play on next Thursday, which is what is Game 1 for the NBA Finals. So we'll see what happens with them when it comes down to it. But I will say this one seems to be a little chalky that they're going to go on to the finals. When it comes down to the Celtics, too, it's really interesting to see Jason Tatum, really, when you look at it, these first 7 years for him have been pretty good without winning a championship. If you were to tell me he would bring them to all of these Eastern Conference titles, that he would get them to at least one finals and lose to the Warriors, I would say that's a pretty damn good legacy in your first 7, looking who he's played with, too. I'm not saying he hasn't had anything. The Celtics have done a good job at plugging in some key cogs on that roster. But I would say, okay, not bad. Not bad for your first 7. But, in any other market, they're probably, unless you're like the Lakers, in any other market, they're probably okay with it. But in Boston, if you don't win a championship, they just do not care. And honestly, they've been, craving that in Boston, especially with, they haven't had a title since the KG, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen team, right? That was the last time they won a title. And funny enough, the trading of those guys to Brooklyn, funny enough as well, is what got them, the assets to eventually get Tatum, funny enough. It's so crazy how some of these assets are pushed down the line and then finally cashed in at a later date. It's basically the reason why they got Tatum and some of the other pieces around him that could move some other pieces around as well. Just ridiculous that we're still kind of talking about the shockwave of blowing up a older team like that. The other thing that I feel like we're not really talking about enough here is Kyrie played for the Celtics for 2+ seasons. I think it was 3 seasons, but was traded in the middle of one of them. And remember, he said he wanted to stay there forever and he was never going to leave. And then it was like, nah, I want out of here. I don't really go well with this area. And so that's another just underrated storyline that we're about to get, is that Kyrie ends up meeting the Celtics and playing against some of those assets to end up preventing them to try to win a championship. That narrative is going to be fascinating. I know everyone wants to talk about, Tatum's legacy, but I kind of look at Kyrie too. This is the team you left, and I think it's going to be a fun narrative to follow. Once again, I am Mike Callow. I'm filling in here for Bram Weinstein, Bram Weinstein Show, ESPN 630. Hopefully, Bram is back in tomorrow. I did want to listen in on this. JJ Redick and Doris Burke were on with SVP last night, and this is what they had to say about the Celtics sweeping the Pacers.
Well, turnovers for them at the end of the game were a huge problem in all these close games. But I just want to say this. For all this talk all season long about the Boston Celtics and their late-game offense and their late-game decision-making, 3 times in the Eastern Conference Finals, they get it done with big shot-making. Derek White tonight, Jaylen Brown. This has been thrilling for us to sit courtside and watch these games. Total team effort from the Boston Celtics. You can point to a number of plays in all 3 of these close games from a number of guys. They are a team.
Scott, can I follow there
Please.
a little bit? Just want to make a point about the 35-year-old head coach who's going to the NBA Finals. He took a timeout with about 3:38 left to go because Jason Tatum had picked up his 5th foul. So he lets him sit one defensive sequence, and Jason comes back in, gets a bucket, 3 rebounds, and a steal. And all season long, I've said a season ago, Mr. Mazzulla was thrown into a very tough situation and had to navigate it. And all season long, it feels different to me for him. It feels like he has managed this season.
Well, you know, DB, what do they say in life? When somebody shows you who they are, you should believe it. I mean, Boston, this is who they've been. They've been the best team in the NBA all season. They've got superstars. They've got depth. And Indiana is new to this moment. I mean, I don't feel like the result is surprising at all. This was what was supposed to happen. But I just think the manner in which Indiana played so well for so long and then in the last moment sort of self-destructed, maybe that shouldn't be surprising either, particularly given who they were lacking in these last couple of games. Is that fair?
That's 100% fair. And I felt like the differentiator was the Celtics have been here before.
Sure.
There has been a collective experience. Drew Holiday is a former champion. He made big play after big play. The MVP vote it was 5-4, I believe, between Jaylen and probably Jason Tatum. Either guy could have gotten it. There probably could have been some votes for Drew Holiday had he had a bigger night tonight in terms of his scoring. But the strength of the collective has been what Boston is about, and I thought you saw that throughout this series.
JJ, the value of rest at this point, and we might very well see it be a lengthy layoff if Dallas is able to finish it off. I wonder, I get the rest that is so valuable, but at the same time, this is a game of rhythm, and you play every other day. Like, now they're going to sit. Now what happens?
Well, look, Boston has had other opportunities to rest during these playoffs. The week of the play-in game, they finished off the Heat. They had to wait a little bit for Cleveland to get through Orlando in 7 games. Joe Mazzulla's been here before. He's going to figure out ways to get them in competitive environments during this break. But I actually think this rest is great for this team right now. Joe Mazzulla said this isn't a bench series. This is a starter series. He relied heavily on his starters. Al Horford playing a ton of minutes. You would assume Kristaps Porzingis has enough time now to ramp up and get ready for Game 1 of the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I think that is going to be key here. And what's funny is the Celtics have their routine down pat now when it comes down to it, right? It's not like they had 6 and 7 game series and then all of a sudden they're going to be sitting at home. They can do exactly whatever their game plan was. You know, they beat the Heat in 5, they beat the Celtics in 5, and then they swept the Pacers and they were chilling at home while all of those other series were, you know, waiting to finish, right? And so that's what I think I would be most worried about if I'm Dallas is with the Mavs. The Mavs are going to be awaiting a team that knows actually how to handle the rest. I'm not sure what Dallas is doing. I'm not sure if they know that with Boston having a routine or they don't know how to have a routine, but it has been a different series with them. You know, the Mavs beat the Clippers in 6, then same thing, beat the Thunder in 6, and here it is, they might beat the Timberwolves in 4, and we'll see. I'm leaning with Dallas tonight. Honestly, I don't think they want to go on the road, so I think we're going to see a really good effort with them. But I do kind of look at it and think, okay, maybe the Boston Celtics actually know how to take their rest and actually take advantage of it, and maybe practice a little bit hard today and tomorrow, and knowing that they are going to be in next Thursday, that's the day they can actually lay out things a little bit easier. So it's going to be fascinating to see how both of these teams have rest either. The one thing I will just weigh in on off the court as well, if if the Timberwolves are swept tonight by the Mavericks, it's going to be so unbearable for the week without hoops of whatever the arguments are about to turn into with First Take, anything Stephen A says, and Get Up. What I, have really liked about these playoffs is it's clearly a shift of the guard, and we've had better discussions, but the Anthony Edwards, is he the next MJ stuff? That's been a little bit tiring, and then we're about to hit a point where, is it too much pressure on him? Where it's like, who put the pressure on him like that, guys? You did. Now, granted, he did talk a lot of trash, and that's his own problem. But, yeah, this is why the NBA discourse without actual games gets to be exhausting. Welcome back. Mike Callow back here with you. ESPN 630, the sports capital. If you missed any of Bram with John Keim, that is now officially up on his podcast page on Apple, Google, and Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. I wanted to keep the Commanders talk going for today before we jump back into the NBA. Udonis Haslem joined the morning show. We'll get into that in about 20 minutes here, but I wanted to jump into, as we did speak with John Keim. Keim recently had Louis Riddick on his podcast. And, of course, Riddick used to work here in Washington, now is a fellow ESPN reporter with John Keim, and analyst, of course, is also on Monday Night Football from time to time, too. And he and John had a bunch to talk about, all the way back from Steve Spurrier to the new regime, to some Bobby Wagner talk, plus some talk on Jayden Daniels as well. I did want to weigh in a little bit there at the end, what John and Bram were talking about, especially with the end there, too, with what's going on with the possible name and RFK and all of it. And, it does boil down to if Senator Gaines does want to do something with that branding, with that logo or something. Bram hit it on the head early on. This is before my conspiracy theory kicked in, which my theory, of course, if you were listening to us at the time, was that this was kind of on purpose. The team was going to be like, oh, no, they want us to change the branding back. Oh, no, they want us to have an alternate jersey. The sense I'm getting from the team is that they will not ever go back to that logo anywhere, but it is not, out of the realm, I guess, to have some kind of iteration. I have said the Washington football team uniform will be at some point an alternate. I have said that many times. And so whether that's you throw a feather on there or something like that, or you sell the shirts for one day and donate the money, I don't know what it is. But Bram's initial reaction to all of that before my conspiracy theory kicked in was that Congress and the government, no matter what they're kind of dangling out in front of you, they cannot force you to change something around your business, such as the branding, right? There's probably policies you can probably flip a company to doing, but you cannot have a team change their name or their look just because you want it to be changed, right? So I think what we're getting at here is that, John and Bram also both still don't know what the end game is here. And now it very well could be they just want to monetize that logo. But the NFL's not going to give it up. The organization's not going to give it up. But I do see where Danes is coming from, where that, I don't want to call it regime, but that group of Native Americans in Idaho is basically kind of saying, hey, if you're not using it, let us use it. And that's not going to happen, but I do think there's probably got to be some kind of mediation here, right? Because as Bram and I have discussed a million times, you just go look at anybody that is on the Commanders beat. There's a bunch of bots tweeting Dan Quinn's t-shirt out, right? Go to Nikki's Twitter, go to Bram's Twitter, go to John's Twitter, go to JP Finley's Twitter. Every time they tweet something, even if it's not even Commanders related, there are bots replying to them, trying to sell you this shirt for $15, $20 or $30, whatever it is. And the funniest part is I've seen people actually that have bought it. Now, granted, they can't buy it anywhere, so they are buying the bootleg version, but then, touting out that they're very proud that they have the shirt. And it's kind of like, all right, it's not even an official shirt. What are we doing here? But I get where they're coming from because they've probably sold thousands of these things, right? But you can't force them to do anything. I would also doubt everyone else would be on board with saying, hey, we're going to force them to do it. My guess is there's some kind of mediation here of a museum that you can go see, whether it's, every day during game days or whatever, or some kind of donation. That is what my guess on all of it is going to be. Now, to move into the present day, before we move into the present day, as I said, John Keim was joined by Louis Riddick on his podcast, so I have some clips to play for you here. Let's start things off with Riddick, who, when he was in the front office in Washington, has a little bit of story time with Steve Spurrier.
It was just that wasn't pro football for me. Like, Joe epitomized again that kind of steady professionalism and competency that you're looking for. Like, I had come from a time in football where, like, I played for Belichick and Saban, dude, at the same time. I mean, you're talking about graduate level stuff, not just from what they're teaching you, but from the way in which they expect you to conduct yourself, the way in which meetings were organized, practices were organized, scripts were put together, the way you were, required to prepare, how you were held accountable. There was none of that at that time. There was none of that. I mean, so it was just, Greg Williams, I believe, was the one who coined the phrase, it's hard enough to win because of in the NFL. It's impossible to win in spite of. And we were winning in spite of, there being, just chaos at different points in time. And you can't win that way. You can't win consistently. I mean, you can rise up and have a couple good games here and there, but you're not going to win consistently. And that's what those times remind me of, unfortunately.
Yeah, Marvin Lewis was running that show that first year. That's why it was 7, and that's why they had any sort of chance whatsoever.
You remember the stories of them going down for the first practice, and coach saying, we'll offensive practice here and defensive practice there, and Marvin goes, "No, we can't do that. We don't have enough guys. We have to practice together here." Like that right there tells you that. Come on, that's what you were battling.
There was one time, and I tell the story a lot, that when you guys are on, and it's a draft, and this is back when the media was in the building, right? And we're sitting there talking to Spurrier at the door to go in the media room, and he looks up at the TV. And he's like, "Oh, we're on the clock. I better go." Like, this is the draft.
Yeah.
It is.
That's just the way, that's the way things were. And you know what? Look, man, there's a lot of people who love Coach Spurrier and a tremendous amount of respect for him. And look, he was successful as heck in college football, and you'll never be able to take that away from him. But the NFL is it's a different animal. And I think we all found that out at that point in time.
Not the first story of Spurrier just kind of not realizing the scope of what the NFL is, or even became, honestly. There's plenty of stories on Spurrier, too, about he would have the training camp schedule or practice schedule in a certain way where he could fit in, 9 holes of golf or an entire day of golf with 18 holes, and would be leaving from the practice facility while he would go and do that. And, Louis Riddick is not wrong there, in that you're just not going to win consistently. I think it was Louis and John who both said that. And that was probably, I think, what everyone gathers with Spurrier as well. The funny part that I kind of look back at now is, let's say Spurrier was just a little bit younger and he was in today's college football landscape. I don't foresee him being down at all with how NIL works and having to keep guys from entering in to the transfer portal. It's funny. Like, I almost look at Spurrier as kind of like almost like an RG3 type work attitude, right? That he had this scheme that he got by with that worked in college, and then tried to get it done in the NFL, but that's what got him his job, and ends up stepping back, going back to college, which ends up working as well, but was never highly successful after his stint with the then Redskins, right? It was with the Gamecocks, essentially, and he might have had one other stop there. My mind is escaping where else he could have gone, but it's kind of funny. He just kind of coasted on by, and that's what it was. And I wonder, in today's day and age, how fast he might have tapped out, because who was it? You saw the basketball coach from Villanova step away as soon as this stuff started to really ramp up. Honestly, you've seen Nick Saban step away, and the reports were that it was time for him, but also that this was a factor on kind of trying to work even harder on trying to keep some of these guys. And look, it's how the landscape has changed, and it's getting to be a younger coach's game for some of this stuff, but even Mike Loxley was on these airwaves during Super Bowl week saying he was thinking about retiring because of how tough college football recruiting and keeping players and making it all about the money, essentially. So it's funny kind of to hear how Spurrier didn't exactly mail it in here in Washington. I don't want to use that word, but he could have had another gear, I think is to use the football term. He could have had another gear in his time here in Washington. Of course, Louis Riddick and John did talk about the new regime here in Washington. Here's what he thinks so far of Adam Peters, of Dan Quinn, and of course, new ownership.
Anything that happened prior to them doesn't mean a damn thing. They are not, they should not be held accountable for any of the dysfunction that has surrounded that place in years past. And quite honestly, like the way it was when I was there, that has nothing to do with them. These guys should be judged based off of everything that happens going forward. And right now, without them playing any football games and being able to, stack up wins and or losses, and hopefully not too many losses, I think all you can go by is based off of what their resume has shown previous to when they arrived in Washington. And like I said, look, Dan is someone who took a team to a Super Bowl, was right on the cusp of winning a Super Bowl, and obviously they don't get the job done against maybe the greatest head coach quarterback combination of all time. That's nothing to hang your head about. He has, like I said, he has taken himself apart, put himself back together. I think he knows what needs to be done this time around. I think the way in which they have methodically gone about trying to reconstruct this roster, build it in the image of Dan Quinn, because ultimately that's what Adam's job is going to be, to put this team together in the image of the head coach. Otherwise, if you don't want to put it together in the image of the head coach, then you have the wrong head coach, because it's not about you, the GM. It's about the guy who literally is managing the football team from ground level, and that's the head coach. So he's trying to build up a strong defensive line, build this team inside out, build it front to back. You've heard me talk about this over and over and over again, through the years. And I think offensively, they had to get that guy who can elevate not just not just take his play and take it from one level to the next, like you've seen Jayden Daniels do from his time at Arizona State to his last year at LSU, but elevate everyone else around him. And by all accounts, I mean, you've seen it down there. You've been around it. It sounds like, even though now they haven't, I would assume they haven't even really gone through like extensive 11 on 11 yet. He is infusing everyone else down there with confidence, with the way the ball doesn't hit the ground, with his demeanor, his grasp of the offense up until this point. That's all the same things that people at LSU told you.
Right.
He really dove into all that when he first got there, and it seems like he's diving into it when he gets there. So again, you haven't played any games. We haven't stacked up any wins or losses yet, but it seems like they sure are on the right track.
And I guess what I was meaning too is, do you feel like there's more hope for this franchise now because of all those changes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, and I said this, said that, right at the beginning here, and I didn't mean to go off on a tangent here, but these guys, their competency, their resume all speaks for itself. Look, Josh Harris is one of the most successful businessmen in this country, and he's someone who has extensive experience in terms of owning sports franchises. Magic Johnson is one of the most successful businessmen in this country, one of the most decorated athletes in the history of the world, quite honestly, not just the NBA basketball, but in history. Adam comes from two places that have just steeped in the tradition of winning. And I would assume that how meticulous he was this offseason will continue to be the case down the road, John. So, I mean, there's nothing that leads me to believe that anyone should feel any lack of confidence in terms of what they've established to this point at all. And then the way in which they went about the draft and the guy who they picked. Look, I think it could be another one of those situations. And this isn't to take anything away from Caleb Williams, just like it wasn't to take anything away from Bryce Young a year ago. I think they got the best quarterback. I think the best quarterback fell to them. And Jayden, I'm hoping, does the same thing for them that C.J. Stroud did for Houston and D'Amico Ryans did for Houston a year ago. I really do think it could be that kind of situation in Washington, although obviously Dan's situation is much different than D'Amico's.
There is Louis Riddick on that new regime. And I think he reiterated a point there that this team, even this fan base, honestly, the ownership especially, though, does get to kind of hide behind, right? You won't get to change everything overnight. You can implement all the changes you can, but you need time for said implementations to actually happen, and that they can actually just put their head down and go to work. You know, that was kind of the funny part with Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy last year. Was it was kind of like, hey, you guys are the holdovers, right? And it was, you know, when it came to Ron, it truly was a point of, yeah, we're going to give you a chance here, but you got to perform. And Ron, instead of actually just putting his head down and, like, I guess making more smart, sound decisions, kind of went for it, right? And got Eric Bieniemy, and you already had John Allen speak out how, like, they didn't feel like they could go and talk to the coaches early on last year in the offseason, and now feel like it's a completely different vibe. And John had literally said, you know, he loves coming into work last week. You know, he said that out loud. I don't know if I've heard players be this, you know, jubilated, you know, going into OTAs and minicamp practices. I can't remember the last time that has happened. And, you know, I think the vibe around this team is that it is finally just a fresh start. Whereas with Ron and Eric, it was like, oh, really? It's going to be like this. As Bram called it, it was a powder keg with free agents and guys that were all trying to play under contract and kind of looking around at each other like, who's staying, who's going. You had Sweat and Young traded in the middle of the season, right? You know, I think the vibe on this team is we are all trying to lay the foundation and just put our heads down and go to work and not worry about the BS of saving somebody's job or trying to boom a season that could bust because you're trying to pit each other, you know, pit everyone in that locker room kind of against each other because they have to play independently, right? And so I just think there's a lot more of a calmness that is happening with this team going into this offseason or going into this season than there was last season. And the calmness is different. Don't get me wrong. I think guys know that they need to perform, but I think they realize if they perform hard, they know they're going to be rewarded and that it's all everyone pulling, you know, on the same rope in the same direction. Because I think that was the difference last season. And I think when you're looking at it too, the absolute worst part about Bieniemy and kind of flipping the script on that side of things where Ron gave him more power was Bieniemy did the worst thing you can do in today's NFL and honestly in most of sports, and that was ignore what these players actually wanted to communicate with him, whether there was offense or defense. Remember, there was talks of they didn't like the offseason program, the way things were kind of laid out, because Bieniemy took some of that. He had the associate head coach title next to Ron. And, you know, the worst thing Ron did was not stick up for his players and kind of go, well, you got to go talk to him. He's your boss now too. And, you know, I thought that was really dumb by Ron, because if there was one thing he did really well, it was stick up for his players. And now it just seems like it's a different vibe. These guys are trying to all get to know each other, but it's that there's someone a little bit more competent in place instead of Bieniemy, like Quinn and Joe Witt, Cliff Kingsbury. This is all new to them too, but they're all going to collaborate on everything. And I think it was just a really dumb way to go about last season, where you weren't letting guys be themselves, essentially, that they had to kind of ball up and just put their heads down and go to work in a different way that they're going to go to work this season. You know, Bram and John talked about it last segment, where Jahan Dotson, we've seen Jahan make plays down the field. Like, we saw him in his rookie year make some really good plays. Is he a number one wide receiver yet? No, not by any means, but he made some crazy good plays that are literally having him labeled as a perfect complement to Terry McLaurin. If there's a player that Ron drafted that I think everyone was lukewarm on, but he ended up performing pretty well, it was Jahan. Did he maybe overdraft him a little bit? Yeah, I mean, who didn't get overdrafted in the Ron Rivera era at this point, right? But I would say, you know, we've seen enough of him, and so it's like already flipping around with him that he's caught the best offseason ball from Jayden Daniels. And that I think that's just a fantastic sign as well. It also just seems this group knows how to pick players. Ron didn't. And so it is just a completely different vibe. Before we jump into the Jayden Daniels conversation, let's ask Louis Riddick, or John asked Louis Riddick on London Fletcher and a Bobby Wagner comparison.
The system was one that he already knew. So he was like an extension of Greg Williams on the field. Bobby can be the same thing for Dan. It's a system he already knows. That now he can just he can give you those extra inches in terms of this is how you can really excel in this system to everyone else. Mm-hmm. These are the things that he's really, that Dan's really trying to get across to you. Let me give it to you from a player's perspective, not just from the coach's perspective. And let me show you how to do it in real time. And then let me show you how to be a professional in real time, day after day after day after day after day after day after day. And those are the kind of things that London did when he was there. And in the command and control center, which is really what the Mike backer position is, you've got to have that. You've absolutely, you just have to have a guy who has those qualities. And then when you combine it with having those qualities in this specific situation where, he's really an extension of the play caller on that side of the ball. And in this particular situation, he's an extension of the head coach. Those are the home run free agent signings. Those are the kind of situations that you're looking for, because those are the ones that usually work out the very best. And we saw it. We saw it. Look, when London came back in those years in the mid 2000s. Remember now, Philip Daniels kind of had the same impact on the team on the defensive line because he was an extension of Greg Blash, who had known him in Chicago. It's those kind of things. Walt Harris, as good as he was, because Greg knew him as well. Although Walt couldn't stay healthy, it was the same kind of thing, the exact same kind of thing. Those are the signings that always pay off for you. And I'm hoping that Bobby pays off for them in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, look, they didn't make enough of those signings when it came to Rivera's era. Like this is what was so dumb about Ron. Ron didn't know how to pick players, really, but he also didn't even take any swings. And it seemed really weird where he signed William Jackson III. They needed a corner. It didn't work out. Didn't work out really badly in year 2, obviously, and they traded him for what, a 6th or a 7th swap or something with Pittsburgh, and then had to eat a bunch of the money. That scared Ron from spending any money whatsoever, and it was just really dumb that they needed a linebacker so bad to help run this defense, and they couldn't get anybody, or at least sign anybody, to hop on board. And so what did this team do? They just go, who's the best middle linebacker that's a veteran on the market? Bobby Wagner? Yeah, give him a 1-year deal that's worth whatever the market rate is. Boom, it's done. There's nothing wrong with that. One of the worst non-signings, and I know he got hurt in Pittsburgh, was letting Cole Holcomb go. One of the few guys that was a mid-round pick, hard-nosed guy that was kind of thriving in this defense. Maybe not thriving is the word, but was the best option they had. And they could have jumped out ahead and tried to sign him before any of that happened. And instead, they don't. And that one was just a shame. So, yes, it becomes a home run hire when you sign a literal 10-year all-pro linebacker when there's one that doesn't even exist on this side of the ball. One more from Louis Riddick before we take a break here on the Bram Weinstein Show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital. Louis, I, of course, played some clips from him as we led into the draft. John, of course, asked him, why does he like Jayden Daniels?
Jayden didn't run from responsibility at LSU. He ran towards it. When things started to get a little sideways, he didn't shrink from the situation. He expanded and grew and kind of dove into the situations and tackled every situation head on. That mindset, that championship mindset, that leadership mindset, combined with his just unique physical skills, that's the kind of thing that gives you a shot, as long as everything else around you doesn't crumble. And I think, we've been talking about everything else around him. All indications are they're not going to crumble around him. They're going to continue to give him the kind of things that would allow him to continue to elevate and ascend. And the people there at LSU down in Baton Rouge believe that he is rock solid. He will not crack. He will not shrink. He will not run away from the responsibility of being a franchise quarterback. And then when you get all that out of the way and you just watch him throw, yeah, it's beautiful. It's the repeatable mechanics, the consistency, feet, hips, torso, the ability to change arm angles, that compact, quick delivery, velocity, combination of velocity and touch. hit all levels of the field, and then his ability to run. I mean, come on, man. I mean, how can you not be just fired up as hell about that?
There it is, Louis Riddick on Jayden Daniels. And as he said, too, his work ethic seems to be second to none. You know, it's funny, too. This kind of times out well. The reports literally coming out today and yesterday that Caleb Williams is already struggling in his first looks against the Bears defense. Now, granted, Bears have some players on their defense. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a ton of offensive firepower on that Bears offense, right? They, signed a few guys, of course, have DJ Moore, have a ton of talent on that side of the ball with Caleb dropped right in there. And, this kind of points back to what Bram kind of alluded to last week. He didn't really say it out loud in a harsh way, but one of Jayden's great qualities and why I like him and why I liked them drafting him at number 2 and why Louis Riddick also liked it was the work ethic, right? And Caleb almost has that same kind of feeling as RG3 where I don't think anyone's knocking their work ethic, but it doesn't seem like they go above and beyond. And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't hear that about, most NFL players, but it's easier to swallow when a player has a bad outing or has a bad stretch to know, okay, they're going to work their ass off to be the best player they can be, right? And so here it is. We're already, first month of Caleb Williams' career, and people are talking about that, right? And granted, how much salt do you put into that? In the offseason, I don't think you put much in because look at Peyton Manning in his first year, right? Peyton Manning goes down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and had one of the worst first years of his career, right? So how much stock do we really put into an offseason? But in today's NFL, you scrutinize all of that stuff. We didn't hear that about Jayden Daniels at all last week and the week before, right? In fact, we heard from Keim that between Jayden and Marcus Mariota, not a lot of balls on the ground, which is what the problem was with the Washington offense last season with Jacoby Brissett and Sam Howell, of course. That the offense looked a lot smoother. Not that it looks necessarily better yet, but things all in all are the arrow is pointing up. When it comes to Rick as well, what he said with Jayden and taking on those challenges head on, there was a stat I saw over the weekend that Jayden, after a turnover that he caused, whether it was a fumble or he threw an interception, his stats afterwards were unreal. As in, he kind of forgot it, moved on, and kind of tried to make up for the moment in a smart way. That's exactly what I want to see from rookie quarterback. I remember when this team drafted RG3. And I think there was some excitement, but I think the excitement was tempered because we just didn't know what was coming, right? I think the hype was really there, but everyone was kind of crossing their fingers and one eye open of like, is he actually going to be good? And then that game happened in New Orleans and boom, off to the races where he won Rookie of the Year. Granted, they struggled too, right? They had to win 5-6 straight to get into the playoffs in 2012. But then you look at the others where, they drafted Dwayne Haskins. Nobody was excited about Dwayne, especially when Jay Gruden was the one to kind of downplay any hype with him, where Haskins was kind of, and also ran to Jay. And then, of course, Jay gets fired because that was a part of the problem, right? He's not even trying to win with that rookie quarterback, kind of buried him, not only on the depth chart, but mentally as well. And then you even go back to Sam Howell. People liked Sam Howell, but everyone was going, oh, well, if it works out, that'd be great. But no one had high expectations for that. I think we're actually getting way more expectations, mainly because of the way Jayden has handled himself as opposed to some of the others. I'm Mike Callow. This is the Bram Weinstein Show. Coming up next, remember Bill Walton with some memorable stories and some quotes from some of the media all around ESPN, among others. We'll get into all of that coming up next year. I'm Mike Callow. This is the Bram Weinstein Show, ESPN 630, and you can listen anytime, of course, on the ESPN 630 app. Probably jump more into this, by the way. Mike Callow filling in for Bram, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital. I'll jump more into this, most likely in my show and the line change coming up next here, but there have been some reports that have come out here. Tom Pelissero specifically came out with it this morning. I didn't see it before I was filling in for Tony, but he tweeted this out. End of OTAs, ? The NFL Players Association is working to finalize a proposal to overhaul the offseason starting as soon as 2025, eliminating voluntary on-field work in the spring in favor of a longer training camp ramp-up, with players reporting in mid-June to early July, per sources. He follows up here in a thread of tweets. The union has been seeking Feedback on the plan from players, a majority of whom support the change, sources say. A formal proposal is expected this summer. Off-season work rules are collectively bargained, and any changes would require an agreement with the NFL. Under new leadership, the NFLPA has consulted medical and performance experts in hopes of creating a common-sense solution for reducing injuries and maximizing players' recovery times. Virtual classroom work would still be permitted in the spring, but no practice until camp. The NFLPA push for a revised offseason isn't directly tied to an 18-game season. However, it's worth noting a longer schedule would further shorten the time between the season and training camp. Another reason consolidating players' time off into one long break would make sense. So that's from Tom Pelissero, of course, one of the great NFL reporters. And then there was a follow-up that I'm just pulling up here from Albert Breer, and he said this: let's just say this new proposal to scrap off-season programs, start training camp with ramp-up period in June, and eliminate the annual summer break in the NFL calendar is going over like the Hindenburg with coaches and front office people. Yeah, I was going to say, this is a little ridiculous. There's no quote-unquote off-season or a shorter quote-unquote off-season. And I'm seeing, run-of-the-mill 9-to-5ers, guys like me complain and say, well, I have to work all year round. What's the difference with these guys? Well, these guys go through, mini car crashes every single play that they play in the league, and it's about to be a longer league. Now, I'm with the league in that, hey, there is there needs to be a solution to the injuries. There needs to be a step up in play. I actually think more so than above injuries, because I think those things, you need to figure it out with some of that. But more so than injuries, the quality of play has gone down. And people don't want to talk about it because the NFL is just the best. But the cream of the crop, they're always the best. Like the Chiefs, the Bills, when Brady was playing, whoever he was playing for, whether that was the Bucs or the Patriots. You go over to the NFC side of things. The Eagles are still really good, but were sloppy down the stretch last season. 49ers are always really good, but you look back at it, and even Tom Brady made a comment about this, that yes, there are some really, really good teams, but the bad football is god-awful. And maybe this is how you do that. You get a little bit more practice time. Now, before I would say ramping things up in June, by the way, I would say let's move to that 18-game slate, eliminate the 2 preseason games, and go ahead and do a 2 to 4 week, and you don't have to do them all in a row, joint practice with some of those other teams. Like, how about if you did that? Let's say you do the ramp-up period in July, right? When does training camp really start up with? I need to find the exact date here, but let's just say you go with your normal ramp-up, but you have teams go and do joint practices. So last year, just for example, training camp started July 27th and went up to August 19th. How about you pump that up maybe 2 weeks? You make it mid-July, second week of July. You make it after July 4th. You do that, and then you have a joint practice every 3 weeks from there, and you just get rid of the preseason games. You don't have to travel with the uniforms and the benches and everything else with that. And honestly, the preseason games suck anyways. I would still say maybe you put the joint practices under the lights at the stadiums that people are playing at, or on the alternative sites that some of these teams are at. I would go that route instead. People would still watch it. From a production standpoint, would it be as clean? No, of course not. But I think that's what I would do when it comes down to it. And I seriously hope they consider maybe something like that than a ramp-up period in June. That is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Maybe, I would say this, maybe what you could do is also do what baseball does, where it's pitchers and catchers report. Maybe you do a rookies report at a certain date, maybe a week early, or you do skill positions report earlier, right? You get the quarterbacks and the wide receivers going early, or you're just walking through with the offensive linemen. I think there's a different way to do it, but June, man, that sounds absolutely crazy. I'll jump into more of that coming up next here on the line change My show coming up next year on ESPN 630. I got you covered until 6 o'clock with that. Then we got Orioles baseball here on these airwaves as well. Don't go away. Hopefully, Bram back in tomorrow. This has been the Bram Weinstein Show. The line change coming up next year on ESPN 630 and the ESPN 630 app.